Mr. President, hello.
Pour cet entretien exceptionnel. Vous nous recevez ici à New York, comme s'il plaît, c'est-à-dire les Américains à quelques blocs
just a few blocks from UN headquarters where the General Assembly was held this week. We will be talking about that and the major questions that are shaking the world today. I'm with my colleague from RFI. Hello, Arnaud. Hello. Elizabeth, hello, Mr. President. So, here, New York is the capital of the world for 1 week as we have the different presidents. You speak to one another, you meet, you carry out negotiations behind the scenes, you make speeches, and of course we'll be talking about recognition of the state of Palestine by France. But first of all, a question about Donald Trump's latest statement last night. He said Ukraine could win back all of its territory from Russia and maybe even more. Volodymyr Zelensky said very quickly this was a big change, a real turnaround. And what do you think, Mr. President? Are you glad about that? Do you think it's a turnaround?
I think this is a clear message from the President of the United States of America. He's saying that Russia is quite clearly weaker and probably more fragile than people thought.
A paper tiger, Trump said.
So it is interesting to see how his take on the situation is changing. In addition to that, it's an acknowledgement of Ukrainian resistance, their ability to hold on to their territory, and therefore maybe even take some of it back.
The Russians have gained 1% of territory since last summer.
No, let's just be very clear on this. February 22, the Russians attacked and they reached Kiev. They could have taken over the whole country, especially that was what they wanted with the special operation, which should have taken only 3 weeks. The Ukrainian counterattack took place in summer 22. We helped. The border stabilized in November 22. Since then, since November 22 through to today, 1% of the territory has been taken by Russia. 1% since November 22. That's the reality.
Ukrainians consider, and our figures show, 20% of the territory was taken by Russia and 1% since last summer alone.
So you've got almost 20% that has been taken if we go right back to the beginning. But what I'm saying is that the stable border in November 2022, since then, only 1% has been taken. So we stabilized the border, Ukrainians resist, we helped them in that resistance effort, and they have been very good in pushing back the Russian army. So now you have the United States of America with President Trump with a clearly new view on the situation.
A new approach.
So we need to act fast because times are tough. And he has taken stock of the Ukrainian ability, the Ukrainian ability to resist. He's taken stock of our collective response to do even more. And I think it's very important because the United States of America, they are key providers of weapons, offensive and defensive weapons.
Without the U.S., clearly.
Currently, Europe is putting in the biggest effort, Europe as a whole. But we need U.S. weapons and their support, as it has been the case since day one. So now, Ukrainians are going to be able to take back lost land and push back. So if we look at Russia and their ability to maintain their war efforts, I think we need to be fully clear on that.
But the real question we have to ask ourselves is, can we trust him? Can you trust him? Do you trust him?
We must all be actively engaged. Since February of this year, 2025, there was a lot of doubt. There was fear that a rapid peace deal would force Ukraine to capitulate. I met in Paris with many of my counterparts, and we put in place the Coalition of the Willing, co-presided over by the United Kingdom and France, with 35 countries, Canada and Australia, and many in between. We put in place a military plan so that once peace has been signed,
for after the war,
or a ceasefire, but it's important, when talking about a ceasefire or a truce, whenever we're talking about that, we need guarantees for Ukraine, and these are the guarantees that we're going to put in place. We're going to support Ukrainian army to support further pushback attacks. Now, in light of what was said yesterday, we can see a commitment from the United States to be by our side.
So you see it as a commitment?
Well, we're going to work towards that as a commitment. In addition to that, we see that our collective power is there to put pressure on Russia. So that, again, given what was said yesterday and what we are seeing out in the field, they are there to return to negotiations so that we can reach an agreement.
Do you think there's a chance of a quick ceasefire? Is it close at hand?
No, I can't say today it's within our reach. We have seen since March that President Zelensky is ready and willing. He said it on numerous times in Jeddah and on many occasions since. But I don't see that availability coming from President Putin.
President Putin does not want peace. He still does not want peace.
We have no indication today that he wants it, now more than before.
Is a meeting between Putin and Zelensky off the table?
I don't think we can never draw a line under it. Another such meeting was held, the only of its sort, in Paris, December 2019. It bore fruits, and I certainly think and hope that this time will come again.
You said in August that you hoped for such a meeting, but it has not happened. Here we are at the end of September.
Well, that doesn't depend just on us, nor on Zelensky. I don't think it's a likely eventuality. I do hope that if we continue to put pressure on, we will be able to get back to discussions. Certainly, I hope it will happen because it means we'll save lives, we'll open up discussions about territory, security guarantees, security for Ukraine and Europe.
In fact, we see there's pressure from both sides. Russians are also putting pressure on Europeans, and they're testing us. 3 incidents in 10 days, Poland, the 10th of September, 19 drones, Romania, the 14th of September, a Russian drone, Estonia, 3 fighter jets that stayed for 12 minutes in Estonian airspace. So is NATO going to react?
NATO will respond proportionally, and we have done so each time by calling out a situation, by summoning coordination meetings as per our bylaws, but also by ramping up our defensive positioning. France has assisted by providing Rafale fighter jets to become the air police in Poland.
Is that enough, Mr. President?
Given the provocation.
You say it's proportionate?
I mean, they are testing our limits, and it's just a test, so we're not going to open fire.
The government of Poland has mentioned it. Tusk has said, we are ready to repel provocations and attacks and will shoot down objects when they violate our territory. Do you support that stance?
First, Prime Minister Tusk is right in saying that if there are new violations, then that is what we will do. But in light of that, they are pushing the boundaries. Our response, our collective response, was proportionate. It is perfectly legitimate that those states who are affected by it draw a line in the sand, and this is what we have to do. We have to draw a line in the sand. So yes, the alliance's position is that if there is a new provocation, violation of land or airspace, then the alliance will respond.
Will the U.S. support you?
The USA are a major part of the treaty, and there is the principle of solidarity by virtue of Article 5.
So you have to have a measured response, so to speak, but nonetheless there is a risk of escalation.
Well, what is the end game for Russia? What is the ultimate goal? They want to say, well, you want Ukraine and your peace guarantees. I'm just showing you that by testing your boundaries, you should better look at your own protection. The exercises that we have been doing with the Coalition of the Willing is compatible with our defensive position on the east of Europe. And this is what we have seen with NATO. So we need to show that we can protect Ukraine because we have our early positions with our collective defense, and we can protect our airspace. So we have to respond fast, which is what we have done. We need to show that we have the means on the table. France has done so. And if there are new provocations, then we are willing to take things up a notch because Russia has taken things up a notch. But it's not in their interests.
To be clear, Mr. President, take it up a notch. What does that mean?
Well, that means if someone provokes you once again, you have to respond in kind, but with a touch more. So I'm not going to do political fiction here, but we have to show that we are credible in these sorts of issues. I mean, maybe you should ask the question of the Russians. They're the ones who started the attack in the first
your
place.
position today, in case of new attempts or provocations, new tests, so next would be to meet fire with fire?
We're going to do what has been planned, to be perfectly clear. But here we're talking about European security. So we can't let the idea run rife that Poland, Estonia, Romania are in a weaker position, because then after them you have Germany and then us. So therefore we have to be unified and credible. And we are, because we put the means in place to be so. But we also see that the most desirable path forward is one where Russia finally realizes that they are powerful enough to destabilize Europe, but they come back to the negotiation table and we find an agreement with Ukraine so that we can come up with a new security pact for the European continent. This is what we are looking for as a whole. And it's what we've been fighting for since the beginning. France has sought a path to peace. When you're dealing with a foreign power that just wants to destabilize, you need to show your position, you need to show that you can resist, remain credible, so that you don't come off as being weak.
And not only in Ukraine, we've also seen with you your speech at the UN. This is one of the major events of the week for you, for France, for Palestine. Can you tell us more about your decision to recognize the Palestinian state, your choice to do so? We know it was a difficult decision, complex, some hesitation. I think you yourself, since 2017, have often changed your position in this regard. This is something that you have thought about a lot. But you know, once again, Palestinians in Gaza have asked me personally, what changed your mind today?
First, France's position has remained unchanged. We have always supported a two-state solution.
But you never took this big step forward.
You're right, but we haven't done an ideological U-turn. Even when others were no longer talking about it, I went and met with President Mahmoud Abbas to reiterate our position. And even in the region, certain players had given up hope on the two-state solution. France has remained constant. No matter our political switches, we've remained constant on that. So why did I choose to take that next step? We didn't prevaricate. We looked at the situation in depth, and we also saw that there was a desire for this to trigger something more useful. That is what I wanted. It's not symbolic recognition. This is a recognition which opens up a process to peace. The decision was informed by a number of things. First, what is our objective? First, we want to have the hostages set free, those who have been taken hostage by Hamas. Total war endangers that. A ceasefire to save lives in Gaza, bring back humanitarian aid. But this is only possible if we can demilitarize and break apart Hamas. If you want to reach those goals, those objectives, you must do it through political means. You need to break the cycle of violence, where all Palestinians are seen as being conflated with the terrorist group Hamas. So that is why, from a strategic point of view, I see recognition as being a way to end the war. Recognition is the only way we can isolate Hamas. The only way. You have the Israeli army on...
Not everyone agrees. Israel has said it's a huge prize for Hamas.
Well, I'm talking about facts. The Israeli army were able to get the deterrence power back in the region. And since we have seen the 7th of October attacks, the victims of the barbaric terror attacks, the wounded, the hostages, but what we also saw was that Israel lost credibility in the region, but they have brought that back because they've been fighting for their security. By targeting terrorist organizations, they were able to get rid of the heads of the terrorist organization.
So you're saying that war has no use today?
Well, what I'm trying to say is that, is Hamas now disappearing because of the war? No. As we currently speak, and Israelis see this the same as I do, there are just as many Hamas fighters now as there were before. Despite the fact that Thousands of them have been neutralized. So why is it so? It's because total war is calling civilian lives, but it is not bringing about an end to Hamas.
And this is why you say Benjamin Netanyahu's plan is destined to fail.
I'm just saying that from a factual point of view, this war has been a failure. So for me, recognition brings about a number of things. Again, it's the only way to isolate Hamas. Because of the Franco-Saudi effort, we have brought in new commitments from the PLA to break Hamas, to demilitarize it. And the much-awaited law reforms from the Palestinian Authority, with new laws that are being passed, a vice president who is elected, change of school curricula, the region is being modernized to bring state to new authorities, which will bring about a two-state solution. In addition to that, you have 142 countries that signed the New York Declaration, a declaration that was signed by all countries from the Arab League, from the OIC, and for the first time, these countries condemned Hamas and supported the demilitarization, demobilization of Hamas.
So, yes, indeed, there has been progress.
What I'm trying to say is this is the only way to tell the Israelis, you're not alone. When the leader of your government is saying, we're alone, we're the only ones to keep you safe, we can show the contrary. There is a peace process in place. There is a way forward, backed by some 142 countries and all of your neighbors.
But concretely, when will the Palestinians feel the effects of this on their lives? I've been talking to people from Gaza who said, what is this going to change in my life? This recognition, I welcome the recognition of France and the French president's work, but how long will it be before I feel the effects of it? There have been dozens of statements of recognition since the beginning of the week, but it has not stopped war.
No, because it can't work like that, but you can't stop war if you don't have a path to peace. So that's what we're talking about with recognition. This recognition is a peace and security plan for all. There are three pillars to it. First, a ceasefire and liberation of hostages. Second, Gaza. And third, two-state solution and the overall regional security structure. Once the plan is there on the table, what has actually changed? The conversation we just had about Hamas is exactly what I had yesterday with President Trump and his teams. It's the one I have with all regional countries. I'm saying it is not working.
What did Donald Trump say to you yesterday?
Well, and now our objective is to do things in the right order. First, we have to stop fighting. So those who can weigh in on Israel, on the Israeli government...
The Americans.
Yes, the Americans. And I told Trump yesterday, you have a major role to play. You support global peace. You want to see peace in the world.
And what was his answer?
Well, we'll see what he says in the coming days.
Netanyahu will be speaking on Friday.
And he said that, yes, there are military operations with colonization back in the West Bank. Nothing of that has to do with Hamas. And that decision is completely unacceptable, so he agrees with that observation. And in addition to that, I said, it's no longer working, fighting against Hamas. The humanitarian tragedy that is unfolding in Gaza calls us to action. We have to put pressure on them.
So you're expecting a two-pronged effect of pressure. Israel under pressure from the U.S.
Well, France is a power in the region, but we don't deliver weapons, despite what some people would say. France is part of the Iron Dome to protect against attacks, so it's a defensive measure. We don't provide weapons, and we don't take part in any of the military operations on the ground.
But you know that the U.S. is getting ready. The U.S. Congress has been notified of plans to sell $6 billion worth of weapons to Israel.
Yes, those people who have a way of putting pressure on them. I mean, there are two ways of taking action, and I do both with just as much energy. We have to convince the Israeli on one side, and you have to convince the Americans to put pressure on the Israelis. So if in the coming days things continue as they have been in Gaza, then we in Europe, we have to take on our own responsibility. And we have to bring in sanctions.
But you can see that clearly the 27 countries are divided.
Well, yes, but I see it and I'm trying to change it. We are all faced with the same situation. And the analysis that I just gave you is one based on fact. Each country has their own sensitivities and history.
You think that the association agreement could be suspended? Are you thinking of Germans when you say each country has its own history?
I think of all European nations. Each country has its own history. And this is what I have said. For example, when I was talking with Chancellor Merz was quite surprising. In summer, came forward with some very powerful statements on Gaza.
So lots of work ahead, and you're committed to doing it.
If the scenario were to pan out, what we are working on, we're not doing political fiction here. We have done work so that we can come up with a new plan. It's a brand new plan. We already made breakthroughs, as I said, with the Palestinian Authority and with neighboring nations. Never before had we all Arab League nations and the OIC together, especially on board to break Hamas apart and demilitarize it. So these are steps forward. Now, building upon that, we need the plan to be spearheaded by the USA.
With Israel as well?
So we need the plan to be spearheaded by the USA, and is often the case in this issue. What we've seen is that there's a convergence of opinions between Europe and the Arab nations. We put forward a proposal, 3-page proposal, which we gave to the United States of America. It is the core of our New York Declaration, and it is the core of a EU-Arab plan. Now, for the United States of America, they need to embrace and engage with it. There was a really important meeting that we held with all regional operators and also with other nations like Indonesia, those people who are very much invested in Palestine and the United States' involvement. So we have the plan, and I think President Trump's strategy is going to be to put that plan forward to Israel and to Hamas, and the first step of that needs to be the end of fighting and the hostages being set free. I think if we can get everyone on the same page, the United States, the Arab nations, the Europeans, all behind that peace plan, I think we will be able to come out with a result.
You, of course, reject political fiction, but of course you've heard that Israeli ministers have talked about the annexation of the West Bank in reprisal to the European plan for the Palestinian state. And Netanyahu has validated the so-called E1 plan for annexation.
Well, I think on that topic, in very clear terms, he said that Europeans and Americans are on the same page.
So, no annexation of the West Bank?
Quite clearly not.
That would be the red line.
Yes, but it would also be an end of the Abraham Accords, which was one of the success stories from Trump's first administration. The United Arab Emirates were very clear on it, and I think it's a red line for the USA.
So, you think it's possible that the West Bank would be annexed?
Well, I think if it were the case, but we shouldn't take what is said lightly. Thinking about what was said back in July, it's why we have to recognize Palestine now, simply because the Knesset put through a resolution back in July. And I think it's quite clear that they don't want to fight against Hamas, because Hamas isn't in the West Bank.
Hamas is not in the West Bank.
No, they're not. It's them working around a political solution. It comes back to this core idea. If you don't give a group of people a political way out for their own legitimate existence, when the international community recognized that some 78 years ago, well then you're going to push them into a sense of a complete loss of hope, or even worse, violence.
Isn't there a risk that the Israeli government could become radicalized? We've talked about this E1 plan in the occupied West Bank, that the West Bank could be broken into pieces. Isn't there a risk of reprisal for Palestinians? The Palestinians are afraid that the offensive would become even harder.
I think quite unfortunately, you don't need that for what to be happening to be terrible. When I see what is happening in Gaza City, the only risk that we're facing one is laying passive.
There could be reprisals against France as well. We've heard about potential closing of the consulate in Jerusalem.
I think it would be a very serious mistake.
What would be the consequences?
Well, once again, no political fiction there.
No political fiction. But a response?
Well, we don't want to escalate the matter, but once again, we don't want to remain powerless. For all of these issues, you must remember that we are going to push diplomacy. France's role is to build diplomacy, and this is what we did. 142 nations working together. France and Saudi Arabia. Now France and Saudi Arabia, we brought a political initiative which is majority supported by United Nations, which is very uncommon in this day and age. All regional players have backed the plan. And that's why I want to highlight how important diplomacy is. Because it's a diplomacy which is already on the move, but we're not players. We're not providing weapons or we're not fighting. And so with that, we need to understand that diplomacy is limited. We need to put pressure on those people to put down their weapons.
You mentioned diplomacy. Do you still speak with Benjamin Netanyahu? Do you explain your approach? Do you speak to one another?
Yes, we spoke.
Have you explained your approach to the Israeli people?
Yes, we spoke. I was able to give him our plan for peace. Now, I respect the Israeli state, the Israeli people. I have great friendship for that country.
And your relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu?
We'll have respect for Prime Minister Netanyahu because he's the legitimate leader of Israel. So we need to talk things out. We also need to explain when we disagree. Now, we disagree on these items. There's no mystery there.
You haven't burned all your bridges?
No, not for me.
Not you, but maybe on the other side they're lighting a few matches.
Of course, we spoke, but 10 days ago. We're going to continue speaking and see how things are going to pan out. We need to keep moving forward because it's essential.
You said that the recognition of the Palestinian state created some worry and dismay in the Jewish community in France. It's the largest Jewish community in Europe, of 500,000 Jews in France. Do you understand their dismay here at Rosh Hashanah?
Well, given the UN calendar, I was not in charge of that, and right now it's Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, I would like to extend my season wishes to the community, because it should have been on the 18th of June, you're right in mentioning that. So I didn't get to choose the date. But if I just may, I spent a lot of time explaining France's position, sometimes convincing people, winning people over. People agree, some don't. Some people understand the decision, they support it. Some people feel that we should have waited.
Fewer than 30% of the French people agree with this recognition without any guarantees in return.
I'm always very wary of polls because just yesterday there was one that said 53% of French people were in favor of it. So you can work a poll in whatever way you want it to.
It's clearly a question that divides people.
But diplomacy cannot be built on such things because that would be an election campaign and I'm not running an election campaign.
But we've heard that people are shocked that you did not set any conditions, the liberation of hostages as a prerequisite to recognition.
But just if I may, the most important message I want to give to French-Israeli people. In fact, France has the largest Jewish community in Europe, just like we have the largest Islamic community.
As well.
Exactly, the largest Muslim community in Europe. But we outlined our conditions very early on. For example, a French embassy in Palestine. Just recognizing Palestine with those preconditions. And that's why now is such an important time. Because one of those conditions is having the hostages set free. But Hamas don't want to set the hostages free. Despite what they say, they don't want a two-state solution. They never wanted it. They want to destroy Israel outright. Prime Minister Netanyahu neither doesn't want to have the hostages set free.
Is he sacrificing hostages?
Well, because if he did, he wouldn't have attacked Gaza City. We wouldn't have started the West Bank. Because Hamas are not there. Nor would he have launched attacks on Doha, because that's where negotiations were there on a US proposal between negotiating states of Hamas, Qatar, Egypt, United States and Israel. So if this is the fundamental condition, then all of a sudden we're going to be handing this over to people who have who have a very different objective. So our objective is clear. It's a condition. We have to have the hostages set free and a ceasefire. And I'm saying this once again because we cannot be taken to issue with this. From France, I was out there as head of state, first head of state in Gaza on the 7th of February 2024. On 7th of February 2024, we put in place a commemoration for victims and for families. I have constantly met with families. So let me say it here once again today. Having the hostages set free is for us the underlying condition. Despite the plan, if the plan doesn't work, we will continue to fight to have the hostages set free and an end of fighting in Gaza, because nothing is worth the loss of life that we are seeing. That said, we are facing issues of anti-Semitism in France, UK, Germany, the United States.
And anti-Semitism spiked after October 7th.
And that has been there in place for many years, which is being pushed by some political parties which is also pushed by Islamic radical tendencies, and it makes it very impossible for some of our citizens to live. I mean, here we're talking about kids who are being taken out of school, families who have to leave their neighborhoods, people being attacked gratuitously in the street, people who cannot wear their kippah, kids who cannot be in schools because they feel that they are unsafe. So faced with that, yes, we all have to take action, because here we're talking about the French Republic. But this has nothing to do with recognition. To say so is falsehood. We never stopped taking action by pushing forth peacekeeping forces in front of schools and synagogues, which is what we did right in the early days. We've taken action at the national education level. We held a summit very recently, and we have ramped up our efforts also from a legal point of view to protect families and children. And even when you get to tertiary education, we changed the law so that anti-Semitism is better accounted for. We also brought place criminal reform so that justice can be served faster in cases of anti-Semitism where it has been identified. So, yes, anti-Semitism is very much present in France and in Europe, but it is antithetical to the French Republic. So as we recognize Palestine, as we fight for peace in the Middle East, in the Near East, we must also continue against anti-Semitism. And we have to, in fact, take action against all forms of discrimination. We need to build back unity.
The clock is running. I'm sorry. We do have other major topics we'd like to look at. You will be meeting with the president of Iran just after this interview. So a question that we're very interested in here at RFI and France 24, we'd like to talk about the Iranian hostages, Cécile Colas, Jacques Paris, and Leonard Monterlos. The head of Iranian diplomacy said that they were now in the final phase of negotiating for the release of these hostages. The families are, of course, very concerned. Are you able to reassure them?
First, I would just like to extend my support to the families and say that France will never abandon its own children. I, my teams, the Foreign Affairs Ministry are constantly in contact, open communication with the families. There is sustained, unwavering effort, which is the sort of effort which, in the past, has seen French hostages being set free.
Will you speak to the Iranian president about this?
Of course. This is the first topic I broach with him. Because, for me, that is what we can build trust upon. So we keep them informed very clearly of things which I can't say here publicly.
Do you have news of the hostages?
So it was actually very hard to get consular visits, especially when the strikes took place. We were very concerned about it, but the hostages had been moved along with other prisoners out of the Evin prison. But I'm also very wary because obviously the less you say things publicly, the more effective you can be, and we want to be very effective so that we can have them set free. I just want to tell the families that we care for them and we are working very hard for them. So yes, we have a clear view forward. We're working to reach that end goal.
We understand your caution.
And in the coming weeks, we will continue working on it, but I can't be definitive here today because, again, it doesn't depend on us.
There are other sensitive topics that will be brought up, in particular sanctions.
Again, we've always been very clear on this, but the first thing is we have to have our hostages set free.
So there is a lot on the table, but that's not a problem for you.
Well, I think everything is known and we aren't going to waver.
We've understood that you've been very busy here in New York. We'd like to thank you for speaking with us for over the 30 minutes you agreed to.
I would just like to jump in because I would like to talk about the Iranian nuclear situation, especially France is taking action.
In order for our audience to understand, it's possible that the sanctions would be activated next Sunday.
Well, this is what was outlined by the JCPOA, which is an agreement that has been in place for some 10 years now. France, UK and Germany together have a power to implement further sanctions.
This was activated in August.
And the process has been set in motion. We're currently finalizing it before it is actually triggered. And we have had very important technical meetings. I met yesterday with the IAEA Director General, Mr. Grossi. I will be meeting with the Iranian president in just a few moments. We also had quite extensive conversations with our US partners on this matter, and our goal is to try and get concrete results. So having the return of inspectors and to give us visibility over Iran to make sure they never get nuclear weapons. If we can get that as an outcome, maybe in the coming hours we will have more confirmation.
It's a very narrow window. There's just 4 days before the sanctions kick in.
Well, the window is only open for a few hours.
So it is possible that the sanctions will not be applied.
Only if Iran makes a gesture in the right direction in the coming hours. Otherwise, new sanctions.
Thank you, Mr. President, for granting this interview to our two stations, FR24 and FRI, and thank all of our spectators.